Good evening, members and officers of the Council, and welcome to the meeting of the Constitutional Review Working Party. Bit of housekeeping as usual. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, do not use the lifts, and assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anybody intend filming the meeting? No? Good. No members of the public? Could everyone please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they're not used or to make or receive calls in the chamber whilst the meeting's in progress? Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public, except for any items of business where exempt or confidential information is considered, following the exclusion of the press and the public from the meeting. Would any member wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1, please announce it? No. Are there any apologies for absence? None. Thank you. Anybody got any declarations of interest? Good. I move that the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 28th of February 2023 be approved and signed as a correct record. Could I have a seconder, please? Seconded, Councillor Austin. Unless there's anyone else objects to the minutes, I will take them as agreed. Thank you. Item agenda 4 is the key decision definition, and I'll ask Mr. Hughes from the Committee Services Manager to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. This report is here as part of the review of the Independent Monitoring Officer. We recommended that the Council scheme of delegations needs to be easy and clear to understand, and includes appropriate conditions requiring the engagement of councillors in strategic and high-risk decisions. So, as part of our work on that, some members will be familiar with the Office of Scheme of Delegations that we took through the General Purposes Committee, which is one end of the delegation scheme, and ensuring that councillors are required in the strategic and high-risk decision-making. That's what this end is about the key decision thresholds. So, the key decision threshold is outlined at 2.1 of the report, or the current one, and the revised one is outlined at paragraph 2.3 of the report. So this has been extensively debated by the corporate management team and has also been run past the Cabinet, who are equally content with the definition. Essentially, the main changes are increasing the amount of expenditure on property purchases from £750,000 to £1 million, and making it clearer that the acquisition of property is actually a subsection of paragraph 1 as opposed to be a standing alone point on its own, if that makes sense. So I can do some examples if people are unsure of what we mean by any of the things that are in there. So for example, we'll get, well, if we do number 1 first. So council wants to buy a thing, a refuse lorry, for example. It's £300,000. Is that over 250? Yes, it is. Therefore, it's a key decision. Nice and straightforward, that one. The best example is, for the other parts of 1A and B, is, let's say a land trust, for example. And let's say we put £5 million into a land trust to go and buy properties in Thanet, do them up and make money that way. The original decision, as that's over £250,000, would be a key decision because we're spending £5 million. Then, if we went out and purchased a property, say for £500,000, we would say actually 1A comes into effect there. So, Cabinet have already given their permission for us to spend £5 million. You don't need to go back every time you want to spend some of that money. The money that's already there. With the exception to that is if one of the properties is over £1 million, because that's such a massive amount of money for one officer to go out and spend. Officers are not comfortable spending over that amount of money. So that would be a separate key decision and would have to go back to Cabinet. Okay? The point 2, again, that's pretty straightforward. So if you have a contract that is £100,000 a year for 5 years, that would not be a key decision, because 100,000 times 5 is 500,000. That is less than the £750,000 threshold in this, which would be over its lifetime. Not a key decision. If it's £200,000 over 5 years, that would be a key decision, because that would be £1 million, and that would be over the £750,000 threshold. Does that make sense? Is everyone good? And then the last criteria is where it would have an effect on communities in 2 or more wards. So that is what we consider to be a significant effect. So if it affected sort of a small amount of people in 2 wards, that wouldn't really trigger this. This is more about the idea of it being a very high profile decision that affected lots and lots of the population of 2 wards. Or if we think that it's going to be an enormously significant impact in one single ward, that would also trigger that key decision threshold. Okay, so those are the main changes. That sort of makes it very clear for what key decisions are going to be taken by the Cabinet, and it's really important to note that in this council it is the constitutional rule that officers cannot take key decisions. We cannot. It's very clear. Only Cabinet or individual Cabinet members can take key decisions. That's pretty much it, really, unless anyone's got any questions.
Councillor.
Yeah, obviously, as it says, Cabinet was happy with this proposal, and that won't surprise you in view of the fact that it's here. But I just wanted to flag up the fact that the benchmarking which has been done against other district councils in Kent, which I think is, we shouldn't always do what our neighbours do, but I think in this case, looking across the piece and seeing that we're well in the pack, really, we're not an outlier in either direction, gives us some comfort that we're in the right place, and it feels like the right place to me, so I'm happy to support this.
Any other comments? Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. I know there isn't actually any relationship to internal external audit, but it was a question for Chris. What was the materiality that the auditors look at, roughly, when they're thinking about the audit? What numbers do they, not the word trivial, but the materiality?
Materials around £1.2 million, to give you an idea of the sort of context of things that they would say. If there was an error in the accounts above that level, they would say that they're not a true and fair reflection of the reality of what's gone on at the council. Triviality is closer to about £100,000. Anything below that limit, they'd say is trivial, if not of importance, which I'm not sure many people would share that view, but that's their testing level.
Councillor Scobie?
And then just a second question. Who defines what the key decision is? So obviously you've set out the criteria, but even when you were explaining it there, it's a little bit of a grey area about, the financial side is clear, but in terms of the impact on the community, you were describing that if it was a minor impact on two wards, it would be considered not a key decision, but if it was a major impact, somebody's got to make that judgment. I'm just interested in who.
We would generally ask the decision, so the officer who's doing the report, but we would ask them to think carefully, and if they needed advice, to come to Ingrid as the monitoring officer or me as deputy monitoring officer to ask and seek advice on that. And then if they weren't sure, I would sincerely hope that they would be contacting their at least their head of service, if not their director, in order to, and then they may well point them in our direction.
And just to reiterate, I mean, Nick has described that perfectly, but it's obviously incredibly subjective compared to, and it's area dependent, but it's something to really consider with, in the context of the environment, the particular area, and in context of a particular decision. So.
Any other questions from anybody? No? Okay. recommendations, and looking at the report, there's 3 options. Could members agree one of the following options? 4.1a is to recommend the revised definition of a key decision as per paragraph 2.3 of the report to the Standards Committee, or B, to recommend other amendments on the key decision definition to the Standards Committee, or C, to recommend to the Standards Committee that no amendments are made to the key decision threshold. Yes, Councillor Everett.
I'll move that we adopt 4.1a then to recommend the revised definition.
Second.
All in favour for the recommendation? Fine, and the recommendation will go through to the next Standards Committee. Thank you very much. Item agenda 5 is review of the Council's policy framework. I'll ask Mr Hughes to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So again, this is another part of the work that we're doing to make sure that we've addressed all the concerns of the independent monitoring officer, and this again is part of the ensuring that councillors are involved in strategic and high risk decisions. So one of those things that I've always, the people who have known me for a long time, have always been saying, like, one of my things is council take council's decisions, cabinet take cabinet decisions. And that, in the main, is absolutely true. However, there is this thing called the policy framework, and the policy framework is a series, or it's a list of plans, policies that the council deems so important that full council decides those, or has ultimate final say on those policies and programmes. Now, some of these are defined in law, others are just what we call local choice functions. So theoretically, if there's something that members feel is so important that full council should be the people that decide that we can opt to put that into the council's policy framework, even if it is something that wouldn't necessarily go to council. So what we've done is we've refreshed this list, because this list is very old, I think is probably best to way to describe it. So you've got things like the local transport plan. Well, that's now a KCC function because they're the Highways Authority. And crikey, I mean, it must be at least 15 years since we were the Highways Authority. So it'll give you a slight idea of where we're at with the current list. So this list, again, was reviewed by our corporate management team. And again, run past the Cabinet. So we are proposing at paragraph 2.4 to take out the local transport plan. That is one of the plans that comprises the local plan. So that's already in as a separate point. So we don't need to include it twice. It seems a bit odd to put it in twice. We've removed the housing investment programme. Having spoken to the Director of Place, he felt it was much more appropriate to have specific policies around housing in the policy framework. So that is why at 4, 5 and 6 we've added the housing, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, the housing assistance policy and the HRA business plan. The food law enforcement safety plan is something that no one's really quite sure why it was included in the policy framework. And then, interestingly enough, in our benchmarking exercises, lots and lots of other councils have removed the food law enforcement service plan from their lists as well. Now, it's very important to note that this is not an exhaustive list of things that go to full council. If something in law says it has to be decided by full council, it will still be decided by full council. Things like the budget, for example, setting the council tax, those sorts of things are council functions and they go to full council. But there's no need for them to be part of the council's policy framework. So that's it in a nutshell. As before, we've got the 3 options. If you want to recommend it as it is, great. If you want to tweak it, you can do, or if you want to keep it the same, you can do that as well. So if anyone's got any questions, happy to answer them.
Councillor Austin?
Can I fulfil my duty as a stereotypical Green councillor and ask if we should be including the climate change action plan in our in this list?
It's up to the views of members. However, what I would say is you have to be careful if you take something that is currently an executive matter and then put it as part of your policy framework, then that ceases to be an executive function. So if you've got a climate CAG and then you then decided to make that a council function, you wouldn't be able to have a climate CAG anymore because it's not a, it wouldn't be the locus of the cabinet anymore.
So it would change the way that we run that whole function. Okay, I withdraw the suggestion.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, I'm scratching my head a little bit about this food law enforcement service, because the rest of it makes totally logical sense. You know, housing issues are coming up. We want them to be on there because we want them to go to council. Some of the stuff's old. That one I don't fully understand because it is a service that council supplies and it's quite important in the community. I'm not suggesting that if it's not on council's agenda that it's not important, but I'm just scratching my head a little bit about how that's been there, left there, and what this change would mean.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have any view on the food law and safety plan, but I mean, I say if members wish to put that back in, they can do. I mean, to be fair, it's still a council function, so it would still from time to time come to council, but we wouldn't deem it to be one of our most important policies. I think that's the way that the policy framework brands them as one of the most important policies.
Yes, Chris.
Nick, you may correct me if I'm wrong, from recollection, I believe this is a plan that goes in the private, would have to go into private session as well. So, because obviously, again, it probably adds to, it makes sense for it to go to cabinet. You could have it under private. There's the scope for it to be scrutinised through OSP rather than, for me personally, if I was advising it, it doesn't feel like a plan you'd want to talk about and discuss at a full council meeting. You'd want to get into the detail at cabinet and through OSP rather than discussing it around at a council meeting, which again would be in private session. So it's not even as if you've got the ability to provide public transparency around it at a full council meeting.
Yeah, I don't think in the real world it's an item which council is an effective body to consider. And I think when it has come, and Chris is quite right, and council's had to go into private session to consider it, doesn't make any sense to me. I think it belongs at cabinet. And you know, if members have a particular interest in it, they're absolutely entitled to come and speak under 20.1 at cabinet and interrogate it. But it doesn't seem to me, they are very happy with the proposal. And you know, if you'd like to assist, I'll move 3.1A to recommend the proposed changes.
Councillor Austin seconded. All those in favour?
Chair, sorry. Oh God, I've gotten feedback there, so I don't know how that's happened. Just for a matter of accuracy. Just check the materiality limit. It's not 1.2. It's 2.7, so it's quite widely wrong. I'm not sure how I got that quite. So it was probably 1.2 million a few years ago. It's 2.7 now, but triviality is 135. So it's right on one of them.
You weren't trying to mislead the committee then, Chris.
That's exactly what I wanted to update. I know. Yeah, 1.2 sounds wrong.
Item agenda 6, Mr. Hughes, could you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chairman. So this is tidying up the council question rules. So currently, the wording I would describe as slightly ambiguous in the sense that if a councillor puts a question in on topic X, they can't then ask that same question within the next 6-month period. If a member of the public puts a question in on topic X, then the way that the rules about excluding copycat questions, are not written in a way that the subsequent question that is the same as the one that's already been asked would be able to be rejected, if that makes sense. So what we're saying is we would like to make it absolutely crystal clear that a question cannot be put to council if it's been asked by either a councillor or a member of the public in the past 6 months. Because theoretically, you could have a member of the public ask a question and then a councillor would be able to ask a word-for-word identical question at the next council meeting, and vice versa, which seems a bit odd. I don't think that's the intention of the rules at all. The other slight change is where we've put validly received in the wording is also something whereby if you had a scenario where Councillor X puts a question in, Councillor Y could put the same question in. Even with that new wording, you wouldn't be able to reject the second question because the question hasn't been put at the meeting, which is where we sort of slightly got quite close to at the last council meeting. So consequently, by saying validly received, that catches it so that you can't have multiple councillors all putting the same question in at a meeting, but also you can't then ask a question that either a member of the public or a councillor has asked in the last 6 months as well, if that makes sense. Cool.
Councillor Austin?
Delighted to hear that last bit, because that was my concern, as to whether validly received meant for this next meeting that's coming up, whether it meant somebody who'd not been able to pose their question but had had a written answer or something like that. That's great, thank you. I just wanted to check about, as it were, right of appeal, and I know that sounds like a sledgehammer to crack a nut, but having had a question rejected once, which I was told was identical to a previous question within the last 6 months, and it was my own question and it was not identical, but the then monitoring officer misunderstood what I was trying to say, or maybe I didn't explain it very clearly. I wonder what dialogue there might be under those circumstances, or whether it's just a question of that's it, you're done.
So the initial test that we do is we will, as Dem Services, we look through and we have all the questions. So all the questions that have been asked in the last, I think it's nearly 10 years, are on the council's website. So you can have a look at those. We will look back over the last 6 months to make sure that something's been asked. We also do a basic check. So is it addressed to a cabinet member or a chair of a committee? If it's not, it's rejected because it just fails the test. Is it more than the word limit? Again, it's a clear yes, no, black and white test. If it's clear that that question hasn't been asked, we pass it on to the monitoring officer with a view to saying we've done the basic checks, we think this is okay. The monitoring officer says, yep, that complies with the scheme, happy days. If we are thinking like, oh, not sure, this is a bit similar, we'll pass it on to the monitoring officer. They will then say, yeah, maybe not, maybe not. If they're not sure, the final arbiter is Colin as the chief executive, and the constitution is clear that Colin has the final say on whether or not he feels that that question is substantially similar to one that's been previously asked. There isn't a appeals process as such, but even if Colin does want to reject a question, he has to contact the chairman of council as like a second opinion type thing in the process of him saying, I think this is substantially similar as this, are you in agreement? Then, so there's quite a lot of checks before we get to...
There isn't a dialogue, as it were, with the member submitting the question, but there is a dialogue amongst officers to check on it.
Which goes all the way to the top.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a specific question and like a bit of a broader one. On the specifics, how do we communicate to people and say it's been rejected, but here's the copy of the previous question, so then at least they have an idea of what was asked previously? Do we do that?
We don't refer them directly to the previous question, but we do say this is the same as one that was previously asked. So we explain, we do say why. We don't just go, it's rejected, thanks very much. We're not that abrupt.
No, but I know-
but I do appreciate.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a fair point. It is a fair
I
point.
find it hard enough to navigate council
Yeah.
agendas and try and
Yeah.
find stuff anyway.
Yeah,
And
I would put a star next to that, which is that is much easier to do if people don't leave it to the last minute. Because what we generally do tend to find, as in all of life, is that we are exceptionally busy between about 3 o'clock and 5:30 on the day of the deadline for council meetings. And whilst we will always endeavour to be as full and helpful as possible, the sheer number of questions that we get makes it not possible for us to go and provide that level of detail in every single case. But we'll always try our best to do that.
And then just on the broader piece, like, I completely support this change, it makes sense, but I'm trying to understand this committee's first time I've sat on it, how this change has come here, but other ones that we discussed, or, I've spoken to you about, Nick, and we've spoken about with the leader, and other things that people may want to make changes, how, because this makes total sense and it should be supported, but I just want to understand as a committee member on here, how do other things get on here? Because I've understood that we're waiting to have a new monitoring officer to come in to do a proper review of the Constitution. Makes sense. But are we able as a committee, while that process is going on, to make small changes to improve like this one?
Yes, I mean, generally, we would always advise somebody to either contact the leader or the chief executive. That's generally how we will start doing things. We flag things that Dem Services find, and I would say this is a Dem Services one, and we flag that with Colin, and then if Colin is okay with that, we will then start the process. But if, as I say, I mean, if we want to get instructions, if something doesn't work or feels doesn't work, then by all means contact the chief exec and the leader, and we can start looking at those.
Councillor Everett?
Yeah, it seems to me a bit unsatisfactory that this isn't formalised, and perhaps as part of the Constitution review it's something we need to think about, because it shouldn't be in the gift of the leader whether a change of the Constitution even gets to the Constitution Review Working Party, because it's not a cabinet function, so I don't see the logic of that. But maybe we can think about what the mechanism ought to be, because I think at the same time we don't want lots of random suggestions coming forward. So.
Can I just add that if there's a concern about the working of the Constitution in any regard, please raise it with myself as monitoring officer.
I think what you're trying to say is that there's no body to approve everything, then put it to us for us to approve it to the next level, to Standards Committee. We haven't got a Constitutional Review Committee. I think that's what you're trying to say. Am I right?
I'm just saying there's no clarity. I mean, I think Councillor Scobie makes a very good point. There's no clarity for other members of the council or even members of the public, should they be interested, on how things get here. So I think we probably need to think about providing that clarity as part of a general refresh of the Constitution.
Councillor Scobie?
Yeah, and I've got a specific example, really, because Nick and I, before the last council meeting, were having a discussion around the petitions policy and the petitions. So the petition coming from the ward that I represent, and Nick was supporting the petition going through as fast as possible, but effectively the Constitution as it was not helping residents to bring matters quickly to either council or cabinet. So we discussed that that's something that we should look at, and I think we spoke about it, Rick, Councillor Everett, we spoke about it, and it's something to pick up. Like, how does that go from, let's say Councillor Everett, was busy with all the other things running the council. How does that go from having a conversation with Democratic Services to being on this agenda as something to actually review? Because the same issue could happen with a petition that somebody brings tomorrow. And, we made a really logical change here to questions which will immediately, make an impact. It would be good if we have a mechanism to pick that stuff up, while also respecting the fact that the Constitution is the rules of the council. We want to make it really hard to change because they're important. Getting that balance right.
Can I ask, is this a Democratic Services problem, or should it come to standards to consider what the councillors are saying?
Sorry, my view is that Nick and I can come up with something and that we can feed that back to you, and so that there is clarity in that regard.
Councillor Austin?
I wanted to echo what Councillor Scobie is saying, just in terms of other functional things we have talked about, and the leader and I have talked about ways of improving our minute taking, for example, for transparency. And I understand, I asked Nick about this because the leader said maybe we can bring it to the working party, and you said no because it's not actually part of the constitution. So where does that sit? How do we do that sort of a thing that will improve our functioning and improve our transparency to the public, but isn't specifically constitutional? You know, there's a question about, I think, about where that sits. And my other comment is, as one of the people who annoys you in the last hour before questions, I will expect that somebody else will already have asked my question and desist.
Are there any other comments? I think, Councillor Everett, you've recommended 4.1A.
If I haven't, I am now. Thank you.
Can I have a second to Councillor Scobie? In that case, we support the recommendation and forward it to the next Standards Committee for onward approval to the Council. Thank you for attending the meeting, and that concludes. I owe one apology, and that's to Ingrid for not introducing you to your first CWRP meeting. I do apologise.
Thank you. It's nice to meet everybody.